A friend got this at an auction. It has two large edges on both sides that seem to be for sticking into the ground. In the middle are sharp spikes that look very dangerous. On top, there's a spring. When pulled up, the spring compresses and the sharp spikes slide along the two edges. I tried searching with Google Images but found no results. I'm really confused about what this is. Does anyone recognize this item or know what it's used for? This is a mole trap designed with a spring action similar to a mouse trap, but specifically made to target moles. Moles are small mammals adapted for digging, with cylindrical bodies, velvety fur, and powerful forelimbs for burrowing underground. To use the trap, you place it over a mole tunnel, press down the raised turf, and plunge the spikes into the ground to create an entry point. Then you raise the spikes and secure them with a spring-loaded mechanism. The trigger plate is left resting on the ground, so when the mole redigs its tunnel, the plate is pushed up, activating the trap and spearing the mole like a shish kebab. I found this weird thing at a thrift store, and the seller didn't know what it is. It's made of brass and looks like a big pair of scissors, but with two big rollers on each end. On each big roller, there are two smaller rollers. The length of the handles makes me think it's something that requires a fair bit of pressure to be applied to the two feeds. Anyone have any ideas on what this could be or what it's used for? It's an odd design, and I'm really curious to figure out its purpose. This is an old-fashioned hair straightening iron. You heat up the metal and then you use it to straighten your hair. The lady who does my wife's hair has one on her dresser. She heats it up in a small metal furnace where it sits when not in use. I think it's an old utensil that African American women use to straighten their hair. I found this mystery machine in the crawl space of my friend's house. It has lots of levers, gears, and movable parts. My friend doesn't remember if it was originally from here or how he got it. We also have no idea how to operate it. I tried searching on Google Images but had no luck. Any ideas on what this could be or how it works? This is an omnigraph, a device used to train individuals in Morse code. Morse code is a system of communication that encodes text characters using standardized sequences of two signal durations, known as dots and dashes, or dits and das. It was developed by Samuel Morse, one of the key figures behind the electrical telegraph. Morse code can be learned and transmitted through various sensory methods, such as sound or light, which can then be directly interpreted by someone trained in the skill. The system was widely used, especially in the military, where proficiency in Morse code was once a requirement for officers. A powerful example of Morse code being used in a critical situation is Admiral Jeremiah Denton during the Vietnam War. While imprisoned in the Hanoi Hilton, Denton famously blinked TORTURE in Morse code, signaling his captors that he was being tortured. This courageous act was risky. If the North Vietnamese had realized what he was doing, he could have faced dire consequences. I found this on a local auction site. The seller said it's about 100 years old, but they don't know what it is. It has a rotating disc with numbers and special characters on it, and the handle can be pushed up and down. I tried searching on Google but got no results. The dollar sign makes me think it could be a pricing tool. Is there a way to fill it with ink or use a tape that could be printed on or embossed like a modern label maker? Any idea what this could be used for? This is a check perforator protector, a device used to protect checks from fraud. It works by allowing the person writing the check to imprint the amount of the check into the appropriate field, making it nearly impossible to alter the check after it has been written. Decades ago, when paper checks were still commonly used, many checks had tiny holes punched into them. When held up to the light, these holes would form a pattern of numbers, showing the exact amount the check was written for. This system served as a security measure to prevent someone from altering the check after it had cleared the bank. The holes in the check would reveal the original amount, even if the numbers were changed on the face of the check. For example, my dad once shared a story from the 1960s where a person wrote a check to a charity, and after it cleared, they altered the check to show a larger amount. However, the IRS investigated and caught the individual because despite the altered amount on the check, the perforations showed the original smaller sum. This ultimately led to the person being charged with tax fraud. Today, checks no longer have these perforations, and many of us no longer receive paper checks at all. The IRS now relies on better documentation, such as receipts or statements from charities, to verify donations and ensure accurate reporting of transactions. This was my deceased grandfather's, and I'd love to know more about it. When you fill it with water, as soon as it reaches the baby, it drains again. I have vague memories of him telling a story about an African woman crossing a stream to escape captors, and the water recedes. I'm not sure what it is, but it seems to have a mechanical or symbolic purpose. The way the water drains makes it feel like a physical phenomenon. Does anyone recognize this and how it works? This is a version of the Pythagorean cup, also called the greedy cup. It has a fascinating mechanism. If you fill the cup beyond a certain level, all the liquid will drain out through the base. The cup is designed to function as kind of a practical joke, demonstrating a lesson about greed. Take more than your fair share, and you'll end up with nothing. At first glance, the cup appears to be a regular drinking vessel, but it has a central column inside the bowl, giving it a shape similar to a bundt pan. This column is positioned directly over the stem of the cup and a hole at the bottom of the stem. A small open pipe connects this hole to the top of the central column, where an open chamber is located. A second pipe connects the chamber to the bottom of the column, where a hole exposes the pipe to the contents of the bowl. When the cup is filled, liquid rises through the second pipe into the chamber at the top of the column, following Pascal's principle of communicating vessels. As long as the liquid does not rise above the chamber, the cup behaves normally. However, if the liquid level exceeds the chamber's capacity, it spills through the chamber into the first pipe, triggering a siphoning effect. Gravity causes the liquid to drain out through the hole at the bottom of the stem, emptying the entire cup. The bronze statue in the middle appears to represent the birth of Krishna, a major Hindu deity regarded as an incarnation of Lord Vishnu. I found this boxy wooden device with ribbed detailing, a light bulb, and Brunswick branding. It looked worn, as if it had seen years of use in a tough environment. The more I looked at it, the more curious I became. It had a boxy structure, vent-like slits on the side, and a compartment on top, possibly for electrical components. The ribbed front suggested it could have been a heater or cooling device, but the light bulb threw me off. Its rusted appearance made it seem like it had been around for a long time, maybe even decades. Was it a vintage fan, a heater, or something else entirely? It was clear that it had a specific purpose back in the day, but what exactly was it used for? This is a 1945 Brunswick Tel E-score, though it's missing quite a few components. Brunswick is well known for making bowling alley equipment, and this piece is part of a Brunswick bowling alley console. The light bulb and glass magnifying screen was originally used to project the scorecard onto an overhead screen, allowing bowlers and spectators to easily follow the scores. Even though it's incomplete now, the design still shows the ingenuity behind it, combining technology and convenience in the 1940s. I have no recollection of how this ended up in my possession. It's a small, hard plastic wiener dog with a strange rectangular opening on the bottom, with rubber flaps on both sides. You can insert something small into the opening, and it seems to be hollow inside. It isn't big enough to fit a coin, and I briefly wondered if an old iPhone charger would fit in there. But what would be the point of that? It's about 3 inches long, and the opening on the bottom is about 1 1/4 inches long, by a bit less than 1/4 inch wide. On the side is stamped CSLUB.09 China and the numbers 300112219. I tried Googling the copyright on the side with no luck. Any idea what this thing is? This is a toy that you dress up. My sister used to have similar toy mannequins or dolls with a flap on the back, where you would use a short stick to push fabric into the flap, holding it in place. For this toy, white bone is used to stuff the fabric into the underside, helping to keep the fabric secure. I was watching Season 2, Episode 4 of The Waltons on Amazon Prime when I noticed something odd. There's a kitchen chopping block, but it's not like any chopping block I've seen before. Underneath, it looks like there's a half of a barrel. I couldn't figure out what the purpose of the barrel was. Could it be storage under the block? Or maybe the top comes off, giving access to whatever's inside? I tried Googling, but couldn't find anything. What is this thing? It's called a pie table. This piece has two bins that can hold 50 pounds of flour each, and two slide-out boards for easy use. The legs even have metal caster wheels for mobility. You might be wondering, how do you keep bugs out? Or is the idea that it gets used quickly enough that it's not an issue? Well, yes, there are always some bugs along the way from farm to table. Flour can have some bugs in it, but they're typically dead due to the processing, though that may not be the case during this era. The bins are made of metal, which helps deter pests. The flour is used quickly, and the house is kept clean to prevent contamination. Some pie tables had metal cups above the wheels, or legs that were filled with a little oil, acting as a barrier to prevent pests from crawling up. A sifter also helps remove any unwanted critters from the flour. I bet lots of rodents? I believe that's the reason it's recommended not to eat raw dough, the hazard of E. coli. I understand salmonella is also a hazard if raw eggs are in the dough. I found a keyhole with a faceplate on the outside of the house, near the side of the door. It's a bit puzzling. It's about 3 feet from the door and 3 feet up the wall. The size is clear when you compare it to the bricks, but it doesn't wiggle or move. Someone stuffed dirt into the top 2 holes, and from the looks of it, the keyhole seems to pop outward when unlocked. But here's the thing. It's not close enough to the door for me to think it's part of the door itself. When I bought the house, no key was given for it, and I have no idea what it opens. The only guess I have is that it's some kind of box for another key. It's a mystery, though. Any ideas on what this could be for? This is part of an old burglar alarm system. Back in the early 70s, Ademco introduced a combination burglar and fire alarm system that was pretty innovative for its time. It had door switches, foil tape to detect glass breakage, and smoke detectors, offering solid protection for a building. But here's the catch. The system was meant for indoor use, yet it often ended up installed outside, without any tamper protection. That meant a burglar could easily rip it off the wall, disable it, and bypass the whole alarm. The companies that installed these systems didn't always have the best practices either. They would use the cheapest equipment possible to cut costs, which led to a lot of security lapses. And to top it off, customers couldn't sue the alarm companies if things went wrong because of a clause in the contract that protected the company from any liability. So even if everything inside was stolen, the company could shrug it off without facing any consequences. This just shows that back then and even today, some alarm companies were more focused on making money than actually protecting people's property. I found this in a vacant office space that was being remodeled. It's made of clear plastic and has a spring that keeps it open. When you squeeze it, the 2 circles overlap and form one. Upon releasing it, the overlap shrinks and a tiny hole forms at the smallest point where the circles meet. There's a notch on each circle, which I think plays a key role in its function. It looks almost like a wire stripper or a clip, but it seems designed for something else. It also looks like it has a place for a screw, suggesting it could be mounted somehow. At first, I thought maybe it was for cable management, but when you squeeze it, the 2 circles align with each other in a way that doesn't quite fit that use. There are no visible marks. Anyone have any ideas? It's for blinds, specifically a chain retainer for a roller shade. This piece screws into the wall and helps guide the cord, keeping it in its place. When you mount it, the screw passes through both arms, pushing them into the open position against the frame. A rope is fed through the 2 circles, and it acts as a movable anchor. When you squeeze it, the rope releases, allowing you to adjust the blinds as needed. I was given this as a gift from a friend who said it was used to hold teas and spices, but I haven't been able to find much else out about it. It's surprisingly heavy, while the inner containers and lids are thin and light, almost like sheet metal. I'm trying to date this thing. The metal work and welding techniques feel old school, so I'm leaning toward the idea that it's over a century old. I initially thought it was copper, but now I'm not sure. Does copper or bronze wear down to a silver color over time? It's all hand-carved and soldered, and there are minuscule details visible under a magnifying glass. It's such an interesting piece, but I'm still trying to figure out more about its history and material. Does anyone know what it is? It's called a pandan. It's used to hold all the ingredients for making a pan, which is a traditional chew made from a betel leaf and various flavorful and stimulating ingredients. Pan is known for its sharp taste, similar to arugula or mustard, but with a more peppery, numbing bite. The experience of eating pan is unique and often customized according to personal preferences. One of the key ingredients is tuna, lime, but not the lime fruit. It's the chemical lime that gives a strong numbing sensation and can burn your mouth if overused. A very thin layer is applied to the leaf. Then crushed betel nuts are added, which also have a mild stimulant effect. It's not psychoactive, but it gives a boost similar to a strong cup of coffee or nicotine. To make the pan sweeter, additional ingredients like gulkand, a rose petal paste, saunf, fennel seeds, and others might be added, creating what's known as meatha pan, sweet pan. Alternatively, for a more intense experience, people go for sada pan, plain pan, which doesn't have the sweet ingredients but may include spices like cardamom, cloves, and sometimes camphor, which gives it a minty flavor. For those seeking a more intense sensation, chewing tobacco may be added to the pan. This transforms the pan into a chewable form that requires spitting out, much like dip or chew tobacco in the USA. Tobacco grades are often indicated by numbers like 120, 300, etc., which may refer to the quality of the tobacco. If you want to try it out for yourself, look for pan leaves at an India store that sells produce. Just wash the leaves and try them raw to experience the unique taste. My friend found this in the woods in the White Mountain region of New Hampshire, near an old scrapyard. He's 6'4" and it stands up to his chest when laying down like this. He says it's solid, and the solid rod goes all the way through, with no visible holes. The fins apparently have water cooling type tubes, and there are lead plates inside as well. As far as I know, there's no mining in that area. It's a strange find. Anyone have any ideas on what this might be or how it ended up there? When you first look at this thing, I'm sure you'll have a lot of guesses about what it could be. At first glance, it looks like a filter with those fins. But the thing is, fins on filters are typically permeable and used to increase surface area. This doesn't seem to be that type of a filter. Some might think it's an oil cooler, but honestly, the surface area to volume ratio is all wrong for that. I've designed coolers before, and this would be a pretty absurd design for one. Another possibility is that it could be a motor armature. But the issue with that is motor armatures need a precise surface around the perimeter to minimize the gap, and these fins are definitely out of place for that purpose. Others might think it's PCB refuse, but it's not really that expensive to dispose of PCBs since they incinerate easily. In fact, they're no worse than many plastics that contain chlorine, which can also produce PCBs when burned at low temperatures. Some might lean toward it being a conveyor head drum. It's a bit close, but the problem here is that the head drum would need teeth or some kind of surface to engage with the belt, and this one just has these weird fins. It looks to me like a through air dryer used in the tissue production process. The dryer section is common to all paper manufacturing where the wet paper is wound around a drum like this, but to make tissue fluffy, air is sent through the paper by being blown through the drum and out the outer surface. I don't have much experience with this technology, but I feel like understanding its history would make it easier to recognize. I bought this at a thrift store for $20 as a funny present for a friend's birthday. It weighs about 30 pounds, it's all metal, and has what I think are hydraulic hoses. There's also a plug I've never seen before. The object has some letters on it that I can't see clearly, but I think it says Huck. It's heavy and mysterious. Does anyone know what this could be or what it's used for? It's definitely something mechanical, but I'm not sure what its purpose is. It's a Huck hydraulic rivet gun. Huck rivets are commonly used to hold heavy-duty components, like large truck frames, together. This tool is particularly useful when truck frames are extended or shortened. These bolts are incredibly strong and are designed to provide a permanent connection. Once they're in, they're not meant to be removed unless destructively. The advantage is that they're easy to install but offer a highly secure and durable bond. A friend found this in the barn of her farm. It's metal with wooden handles and there are no other marks on it. It's shaped like a sickle but has two handles, one of which has a ratchet-like item on it. It's an interesting tool, but I'm not sure what it's meant to do. Does anyone recognize this and know what it's used for? This is a valve spring compressor, likely designed for a specific type of engine, probably a tractor engine. It only needs to compress the spring about a ½ inch at most, which is just enough space to remove the keepers. Since the compression required is minimal, Not much mechanical advantage is needed for this tool to function effectively. I found this in a naval scrapyard. It's heavy and has a typical clockwork counter that reads ones, tens, 100s, and 1000s. A propeller turns a worm gear that drives the counter. The worm gear only engages when the unit is nose down. This is just a guess, but since it only operates the counter when it's nose down, I strongly suspect it might be a device for measuring depth of water at sea or in rivers. But depth can be measured from the boat by looking at how much line you've let out. So is it really that complex? Any idea what this is made for? It is a taffrail log, also known as a speed log. A taffrail log is a device historically used on ships to measure the distance traveled through water. It is typically attached to the ship's stern, the taffrail, and works by using a rotating wheel or drum that is dragged through the water. As the ship moves, the device records the distance covered, and the data could then be used for navigation and record keeping. The taffrail log was an essential tool for maritime navigation before modern GPS and electronic systems became widespread. It helped sailors track their voyage progress, estimate speed, and calculate the ship's position. The device often featured a mechanical counter or was connected to a chart recorder for visual logs. While still used on some vessels today, taffrail logs have largely been replaced by more advanced electronic navigational equipment. It was acquired from an antique store in Maine a few years ago. The person who bought it didn't know what it was, just thought it would be an interesting conversation piece. It is 8.5 inches long and the bowl is 2 inches in diameter. This tool has stumped antique dealers for years and even stumped 4 antiques roadshow appraisers. One of the appraisers suggested that the cleats might have been used to scuff a surface, and the bowl would have held glue, which would then have been applied to that surface. The tool would allow for heating the glue when it would set up. However, this was only a guess, and he was truly stumped. What is this tool? Anyone have any ideas on what it might be used for? This is an old carpet stretcher. It was used to stretch carpets tightly over the floor before they were tacked or nailed down. The tool was typically used in carpet installation to ensure that the carpet was smooth and taut, with no wrinkles or folds. To use the carpet stretcher, a person would hold the tool in their left hand while using a hammer in their right hand. By pressing the carpet stretcher downward so as to cause its spurs to enter the carpet, he will be able, by pushing forward the implement, to move the carpet up to the place required, and there retain it while he can pick a tack out of the cup, insert it within the notch, and drive it through the carpet into the floor. The arrangement of the notch and the front of the forward spurs enables the carpet to be held to better advantage about the tack than would be the case were there no notch in the stretcher as described. The cup forms a convenient receptacle for the tacks and saves the necessity of them being held in the mouth of a person, as is common with upholsterers or those who practice the business of fixing carpets to floors. Last week while I was on holiday in Bourg, just above Bordeaux, France, I came across something very interesting in our Airbnb. It was an unusual item that I couldn't quite figure out. The device consists of 2 parts connected by a tube. The right part, which is the larger of the two, looks like some sort of kettle, but there's no sign of fire damage, which makes me wonder how it's used. The top of the kettle-like part has a spout that flows into another container. Inside this container, there's a coil, and the container itself has another nozzle sticking out, which looks like it used to be connected to something else. The right part of this device is about 51 inches high and 20 inches wide, while the left part is smaller, measuring around 24 inches high and 14 inches wide. I'm really curious about what this thing is and what it's for. Given the location, I thought maybe it has something to do with winemaking, but I'm not sure. Does anyone recognize this strange piece of equipment or know its purpose? That's an alembic still. The bigger pot holds the starting liquid that gets distilled, but the smaller pot with the coil is called a condenser. Just water or ice water goes in there, sitting around the coils. As hot gas of what boils off in the big pot moves through the system, it cools in that coil and flows out into your containers. I say containers because it's not how much you make, but you have to make sets of liquid or cuts in a distilling run to find where your heads, hearts, and tails are. The foreshot, or the first initial things to come off the still, are toxic and are discarded. What comes after that are the heads. Stupid high proof, but frankly disgusting. Use this for cleaning or just tossed at most places. The hearts are what you want, the good-smelling, good-tasting distillate that is either sold as is or barreled, often to rest or age. The tails are when actual water starts to boil. Tails are most entirely discarded. The alembic still is very old method of distilling by going a single batch at a time. You also have to make some kind of alcohol ready to put in there, things similar to beers or wines classically. I do have to say, don't use this if you don't know what you're doing. You'll hurt yourself, but this is still super cool. Today, while going through a family member's old shop, I came across an incredibly heavy steel contraption. It's about 18 inches long and weighs roughly 50 pounds. One end has a gear, and the other end has a sphere that splits open when the gear is turned, revealing an inner mechanism. I know that my family members worked on boilers from around the 1950s through the 1980s, but I can't seem to find any information on what this might be. I tried searching based on variations of the title with no success. Does anyone recognize what this might be or what it was used for? This is a steam engine governor. When a load is applied to the engine, it causes the engine to slow down, which makes the balls inside the governor move inwards. This movement adjusts the fuel flow to increase the speed of the engine in order to match the required load. When the load is removed, the reverse happens. The balls move outward, and the fuel flow is reduced to prevent the engine from overspeeding. The governor spins, driven by the bevel gear on the end, and as the speed increases, the two halves of the governor open wider and wider. This helps maintain a consistent speed and prevents damage to the engine. I recently acquired an old wooden box that's filled with some type of solid heavy material. On one side of the box, there are metal fixtures, but other than that, I have no information on what this is. The box is very heavy, and the black material inside seems like a rock type of substance, though I'm not sure exactly what it is. Does anyone have any ideas on what this could be or what it might have been used for? That is a trembler coil or buzz coil, sometimes called a jump box or tumbler coil, which just outputs jolts of high voltage. They had a few uses, but in this case, it was probably used to provide ignition to an automotive engine, early 20th century. The black sludge inside is a tar-like insulating compound, which has hardened over time. On a Ford, I don't think this is from a Ford, but they used a few different models. If it is, then it's perhaps a tractor model. That compound was called Ford Hydroline. This strange item comes from a house that belonged to a relatively wealthy man in Belgium, who had married a woman from Bulgaria. The house was located close to the forest. I'm not sure exactly when or where this item originated, whether it came from Bulgaria or had been in the Belgian family for generations. But one thing is certain, they were not farmers. The object is about 50 centimeters wide by 50 centimeters high, and it has iron chains attached to the wooden knobs. On one side, the rings on the chains fit perfectly around the knobs. On the other side, the chains are much shorter, not long enough to reach the other wooden pegs. The strange part is that the knobs don't show any wear from the chains, leading me to believe that the chains weren't originally meant to fit there. I've been staring at it for days, trying to figure out what it could be. I'm not sure if it's an old tool, farming equipment, or maybe something entirely different. It's been bugging me, and I'm really hoping someone out there can shed some light on what this might be. If anyone has any idea, please leave a comment below the video.